Stella Monroe sat across from her father in the cramped office that used to belong to her mother. The walls were covered with photographs of beautiful weddings, corporate galas, and charity events that Monroe Events had organized over the past 20 years. Each picture represented a dream come true for someone else. Today, Stella was about to sign away her own dreams to keep those memories alive. Her father placed the document on the desk between them. His hands shook slightly as he smoothed the pages. Stella noticed the new lines around his eyes, the gray that had crept into his hair over the past 6 months since her mother passed away. The grief had aged him terribly, and now the business failure was crushing what remained of his spirit. "Julian Ashford has agreed to the terms," her father said quietly. His voice carried the weight of a man who had run out of options. "He will invest $3 million into the company. In return, you become his wife for a minimum of 1 year. After that, if either party wants to dissolve the marriage, you can separate quietly." Stella picked up the contract with steady hands even though her heart was racing. She had heard of Julian Ashford before. Everyone in the city knew about the youngest real estate developer to build a billion-dollar empire before turning 30. The newspapers called him brilliant. Business magazines featured his success stories, but the society pages whispered different tales about the man himself. Cold, unreachable, a heart made of ice after a tragedy. Nobody talked about publicly. "He wants to meet you before the wedding," her father added. "Tomorrow afternoon at his office." The man behind the reputation, the Ashford Tower, pierced the sky like a glass needle, reflecting clouds and sunlight in equal measure. Stella stood in the marble lobby, her reflection staring back from every polished surface. She wore a simple navy dress and carried herself with quiet dignity. Even though inside she felt like she was walking toward the edge of a cliff. The elevator climbed 60 floors in smooth silence. When the doors opened, a young assistant greeted her with a professional smile and led her down a hallway where abstract art hung on white walls. Everything was clean, expensive, and completely impersonal. Julian's office occupied the entire corner of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city sprawling below like a toy model. And there, standing with his back to the door, was the man himself. He turned when she entered. Stella felt her breath catch for just a moment. Julian Ashford was tall and lean, with dark hair styled with careless precision. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but it was his eyes that stopped her. They were a striking shade of amber, bright and clear, yet somehow empty of warmth, like looking at a beautiful painting behind protective glass. "Miss Monroe?" He extended his hand. His voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of someone who spent his life in boardrooms negotiating deals. "Thank you for coming." She shook his hand. His grip was firm but brief. "Mr. Ashford, please sit." He gestured to the chairs arranged near the windows, waited until she settled before taking his own seat, maintaining a careful distance between them. "I assume your father explained the terms." He did. Stella met his gaze directly. She refused to look away first. "Then you understand this is a business arrangement." Julian leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "I need a wife for certain social and business obligations. You need financial security for your family company. We both benefit from this arrangement, and after a year, we reassess. If the arrangement no longer serves us, we separate amicably. You keep a settlement. I keep my privacy." He spoke as if discussing a merger, not a marriage. Stella studied him carefully. Beneath the polished exterior, she sensed something else. Not cruelty, but caution. Like someone who had learned to protect himself by keeping everyone at a safe distance. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. For the first time, something flickered in those amber eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or pain quickly hidden. "That is not part of our agreement, Miss Monroe. If we are going to be married even for business, should I not know something about the man I will live with?" Julian stood abruptly and walked to the window. He placed one hand against the glass, looking down at the city below. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. "I was engaged once. She died in a car accident 3 years ago. Since then, I have focused on work. That is all you need to know." The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Stella felt an unexpected wave of sympathy wash over her. This was not a cold man. This was a broken man, hiding behind walls of ice. "I am sorry for your loss," she said gently. He turned back to her, and for just a second, his expression softened. "The wedding is scheduled for next Saturday. My assistant will handle all arrangements. You need only to show up." Stella wore a simple cream dress she had bought the day before. Julian wore another expensive suit, this one navy blue. There were no guests, only the judge and 2 witnesses pulled from the courthouse staff. When the judge asked if she took Julian Ashford as her lawfully wedded husband, Stella looked at the man standing beside her. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes fixed on some distant point. She wondered what he was thinking. Was he remembering the woman he had planned to marry before? Was he regretting this entire arrangement? "I do," she said clearly. Julian's turn came. His voice was steady and emotionless. "I do. You may kiss the bride." Julian turned to her with an expression that might have been apologetic. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers for barely a second. It was not a kiss. It was an obligation fulfilled. Then he stepped back immediately, putting distance between them once more. "Mrs. Ashford," he said formally, as if trying out the name. Stella felt something crack inside her chest. This was her wedding day, and she had never felt more alone. The first night of silence, Julian's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in the heart of the city. The elevator opened directly into the main living space, a vast open area decorated in shades of gray and white. Modern furniture sat at precise angles. Not a single personal item broke the sterile perfection. "Your bedroom is on the 2nd level," Julian said, already pulling out his phone to check messages. "The housekeeper left dinner in the kitchen if you are hungry. I have calls to make." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into what she assumed was his home office. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Stella stood alone in the enormous living room, her small suitcase at her feet. Through the windows, the city lights glittered like scattered diamonds. Somewhere out there, people were celebrating their wedding nights with champagne and laughter. Here, she could not even hear her husband breathing. She climbed the floating staircase to the 2nd level and found her room. It was beautiful in the same cold way as the rest of the penthouse. A king bed with white linens, a private bathroom with marble everything, a balcony overlooking the city. But there was no warmth, no life, no hint that anyone actually lived in this space. Stella unpacked her few belongings and changed into comfortable clothes. She thought about going downstairs to find that dinner Julian mentioned, but the idea of eating alone in that vast kitchen made her stomach turn. Instead, she lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. This was her life now, a beautiful cage made of glass and steel. A husband who spoke to her like a business associate, marriage without love, or even basic companionship. She thought about her mother, who had loved her father with her whole heart for 30 years. Her mother would never have understood this arrangement. But her mother was gone. Stella had made the choice to save the legacy her mother built. The city hummed far below, different to one woman's quiet heartbreak on the 60th floor. 3 weeks passed in Julian's penthouse like sand slipping through an hourglass. Each day followed the same pattern. Stella woke to find Julian already gone, his coffee cup rinsed and placed in the dishwasher, his presence erased from the space as if he were a ghost. She spent her mornings working remotely for Monroe Events, which was slowly recovering thanks to Julian's investment. Her father called weekly to thank her, his voice lighter than it had been in months. At least someone's happiness came from this arrangement. Stella tried to make the penthouse feel like a home. She bought fresh flowers for the living room, their bright colors a rebellion against all the gray and white. She moved a few pieces of furniture to create a cozier reading corner by the windows. She even attempted to cook proper dinners, hoping Julian might join her at the table. But Julian remained a shadow in his own home. He returned late each night, usually after Stella had already eaten alone. Hallway, the sound of his office door closing, the murmur of his voice during late business calls. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him in the early morning, always dressed impeccably, always moving with purpose towards somewhere that was not here. They exchanged perhaps 20 words a day. Good morning, good night. There is food in the refrigerator. Thank you. Each interaction was polite and hollow. Like strangers sharing an elevator, Stella told herself she should not care. This was a business arrangement. She had signed the contract, knowing exactly what it entailed. But something inside her refused to accept this cold coexistence. Perhaps it was her mother's daughter speaking, the part of her that believed in connection and warmth between two people sharing a space. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps she was just lonely. The breaking point the fourth week brought rain. Stella stood on her balcony watching the storm roll across the city, lightning illuminating the buildings in brief flashes. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and she wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. She heard the elevator chime downstairs. Julian was home earlier than usual. She glanced at her watch. Only 8 o'clock. In the past weeks, he had never returned before 10. Stella made a decision. She dried her hair, changed into a soft sweater, and went downstairs. She found Julian. In the kitchen, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over a chair. He was staring into the open refrigerator with an expression that looked almost lost. "I made pasta," Stella said from the doorway. "There's plenty if you are hungry." Julian turned, surprise flashing across his face. For a moment she thought he might retreat to his office as usual. But then something shifted in his expression. Exhaustion, maybe, or resignation. "That would be nice," he said quietly. "Thank you." They sat at the kitchen island, not quite looking at each other as Stella reheated the food. In front of him and took the seat one space away, maintaining the distance he seemed to need. Julian ate slowly, and Stella noticed details she had missed before. The shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands moved with mechanical precision, as if he had forgotten how to simply exist without a purpose. "How is the company doing?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Better. The new contracts your connections provided have helped significantly." Stella pushed pasta around her plate. "My father wants to thank you personally. That is not necessary. It was part of our agreement. Still, it means everything to him. To me as well." Julian set down his fork and finally looked at her directly. His amber eyes held something she had not seen before. Genuine curiosity mixed with caution. "You never talk about what you want from this arrangement, only what your father needs." Stella felt her heart quicken. This was the most personal thing he had asked her since the wedding. "What I want does not matter much, does it? We both know what this is." "But if it did matter," Julian pressed gently, "what would you want?" She considered lying, giving him the safe answer. But something about the late hour, the rain outside, and the unexpected vulnerability in his voice made her honest. "I would want to know the person I live with, not as a business partner, just as a person." She met his gaze. "I would want to have dinner together sometimes, to talk about things that are not contracts or companies. I would want to feel less alone in a home I share with someone." Julian looked down at his plate. A muscle worked in his jaw. "That was not part of our agreement, I know. But agreements can change. People can choose to let each other in. What if I cannot?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "What if I do not know how anymore?" The truth in the dark, the rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows. Neither of them moved. To turn on more lights, and the kitchen fell into soft shadows, broken only by the glow from the city below. "Tell me about her," Stella said softly. "Is the woman you were going to marry?" Julian flinched as if she had struck him. For a long moment, she thought he would stand and walk away. But instead, he stayed seated, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Her name was Victoria. We met in college. She was studying architecture, and I was in business school. She used to say we balanced each other. I was all logic and numbers. She was creativity and dreams." His voice carried the weight of old grief. "We were engaged for 6 months. She was driving home from a meeting with a wedding planner when a drunk driver ran a red light." Stella felt tears prick her eyes. "Julian, I am so sorry. Everyone said time would heal it, that I would move on eventually. But they did not understand." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It was not just losing her, it was losing the future we had planned. The home we were going to build, the children we talked about having. The entire life I thought was coming, so you built walls instead." Stella said gently. Walls are safer than windows. Windows break. Stella took a breath and made a choice. She stood and moved to the seat directly beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Julian tensed, but did not pull away. Blay? I lost my mother 8 months ago, she said quietly. Getcha. We had 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Every day I watched her slip further away. She made me promise something before she died. What was that? She made me promise not to be afraid of living. She said grief is the price we pay for love, but we have to pay it because a life without love is not really living at all. Stella turned to look at him. You honor Victoria's memory by being afraid to feel anything? Julian's breath hitched. You do not understand. If I let myself care again, if I let someone close and I lose them, it will destroy what is left of me. Or, Stella said softly, maybe it would remind you that you were still alive, still capable of feeling something other than fear. They sat in silence for several heartbeats. The storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil inside both of them. Finally, Julian reached out slowly and took her hand. His fingers were warm and slightly trembling. I have been terrible to you, he said. You did not deserve to be treated like furniture in your own home. You have been protecting yourself. I understand that. This understanding does not make it right. He squeezed her hand gently. When you moved those chairs by the window last week? When you brought flowers into the house, when you started cooking dinners even though I never joined you, I noticed all of it. And it scared me because it made this place feel like a home instead of just a space I sleep in. Stella felt her heart swell with hope and heartache mixed together. Would it be so terrible to let this feel like a home? Julian stood abruptly, pulling her up with him. For a moment, she thought he was retreating again, building the walls back up. But instead, he kept holding her hand and led her toward the windows overlooking the rain-soaked city. I have not let anyone close to me in 3 years, he said, still holding her hand. I wake up every morning and go through the motions of being alive without actually living. Work fills the hours. Success fills the resume. But none of it fills the emptiness. You are not empty, Julian. You are just hurting. He turned to face her fully, and she saw his careful control beginning to crack. What if I try? What if I let you in, and I fail? What if I am too broken to be what you deserve? Stella reached up with her free hand and gently touched his face. He closed his eyes at the contact, a shaky breath escaping him. What if you succeed? What if we help each other become less broken together? Julian opened his eyes, and for the first time since she met him, she saw real emotion flooding through. Fear, hope, longing, all the things he had kept locked away behind that icy exterior. I do not know how to do this, he whispered. I do not know how to let someone matter again. Then we learned together, one small step at a time. The rain continued its steady rhythm. The city lights blurred through the wet windows like watercolored paint. And in that moment, standing close enough to feel each other's warmth, something fundamental shifted between them. Julian lifted his hand slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was tender, uncertain, as if he were remembering how to touch someone with affection instead of obligation. Can we start over? He asked quietly. Not as strangers bound by a contract, but as two people trying to figure out how to share a life. Stella smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had felt in weeks. I would like that very much. I'll probably mess this up. I will probably retreat sometimes when things feel too intense, and I will probably push too hard sometimes because I am tired of being lonely. So we will be imperfect together. It sounds better than being perfect and alone. Julian pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in a real embrace, not the brief, obligatory contact of their wedding day, but a genuine hug between two people seeking comfort in each other. Stella pressed her face against his chest and heard his heartbeat, strong and steady and undeniably alive. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, while the storm raged outside. Neither of them spoke. They did not need words for this moment. Sometimes healing begins in silence. In the simple act of holding on when letting go has been the pattern for too long. When they finally separated, Julian kept his hands on her shoulders, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I am not ready for everything, he said honestly. but I am ready to try. To have dinner together, to talk about things that matter, to stop hiding in my office every night. That is more than enough." He smiled then, a small, fragile thing, but real. "Should we start with finishing dinner?" Stella laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet penthouse. "That seems like a reasonable first step." They returned to the kitchen island, but this time they sat beside each other, instead of separated by empty space. They talked while they ate, sharing small stories about their days, their childhoods, the silly things that make a person who they are. Julian told her about the time he tried to build a treehouse as a child and ended up stuck in the tree until his father rescued him. Stella shared memories of helping her mother plan events, learning that every detail matters. When you are creating someone's dream day, the conversation flowed easier than either of them expected. Laughter replaced awkward silence. Genuine interest replaced polite distance. And slowly, carefully, two people who had been strangers began the delicate process of becoming something more. By the time they cleaned up the kitchen together, the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and glittering under a clearing sky. Julian walked Stella to the stairs leading to her room, and they paused at the bottom step. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not giving up on the possibility of this being something real. Thank you for being brave enough to try." He leaned in and kissed her forehead gently. Not romantic, but affectionate. A promise of more to come when they were both ready. Stella climbed the stairs, feeling lighter than she had in months. Behind her, she heard Julian heading to his own room instead of his office. Small victories. Small steps. But movement forward nonetheless. Stella woke to sunlight streaming through her windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. For a moment, she lay still, wondering if last night had been real or just a dream born from loneliness. But then she heard movement downstairs, the clink of dishes, and something she had never heard before in this penthouse, someone humming softly. She dressed quickly in comfortable jeans and a light sweater, her heart beating faster as she descended the stairs. Julian stood at the kitchen counter, still in his pajama pants and a simple t-shirt. His hair was slightly messy, unstyled for once, and he looked younger somehow, more human. He glanced up when she entered, and a genuine smile crossed his face. "Good morning," he said, and his voice carried warmth instead of formality. "I made coffee, and I attempted pancakes, though I should warn you that cooking is not my strength." Stella looked at the slightly lopsided pancakes stacked on a plate and felt her heart swell. They looked perfect. They ate breakfast together on the balcony, the morning air fresh and clean after last night's rain. Julian told her about a meeting he had later that day. Then he asked about her plans, actually listening when she talked about a new client her company had landed. The conversation felt natural, easy, like they had been doing this for years instead of attempting it for the first time. "I was thinking," Julian said as he refilled her coffee cup, "maybe we could have dinner together tonight." "It's not here." "Actually go out to a restaurant like normal people. Like a date?" Stella asked, unable to hide her smile. "Like a date," he confirmed, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "I realize I never actually took you on one before marrying you. That seems backward. Most things about us have been backward. Maybe that is just our style. Building something real." The next 2 weeks unfolded like a revelation. Julian came home at reasonable hours, and they cooked dinner together, laughing when things burned or turned out strangely. They watched movies on the enormous television that had never been turned on before, arguing playfully about whether action films or dramas were superior. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, sharing pieces of themselves they had kept hidden. Julian showed her his favorite walking route through the city at dawn. When the streets were empty and peaceful, Stella introduced him to the small bookstore her mother had loved, where they spent hours browsing and debating which novels to buy. Slowly, carefully, they were learning each other's rhythms, discovering how separate lives could begin to harmonize. One evening, Julian came home carrying a large flat package. He found Stella curled up in the reading corner she had created, nose deep in a novel. "I have something for you," he said. Setting the package down carefully, Stella set aside her book, curiosity lighting her eyes. She unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful framed photograph. It was her mother, captured at one of the last events Monroe Events had organized before she got sick. She was laughing, surrounded by flowers, looking radiant and alive. "How did you?" Stella's voice caught in her throat. "I asked your father for a photo. I thought maybe you would want her here with you. Make this place feel more like your home, too." Tears spilled down Stella's cheeks, but she was smiling. "This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." Julian knelt beside her chair, gently wiping away her tears. "You made me remember how to feel again. The least I can do is help you keep your memories close." That night, they hung the photograph in the living room, and for the first time, the penthouse truly felt like a home instead of a showroom. The night everything changed, 3 days later. Julian surprised Stella by coming home early with reservations at an upscale rooftop restaurant. She wore a deep blue dress that made her eyes sparkle, and he could not stop looking at her throughout dinner. They shared wine and stories, their hands finding each other across the table naturally, as if they had always belonged together this way. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting off the dark water like fallen stars. Julian held her hand, and Stella felt a contentment she had not known was possible just a month ago. "I need to tell you something," Julian said, as they paused by the railing overlooking the water. His voice was serious, and Stella felt a flutter of nervousness. "What is it?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "When we got married, I thought I was doing something practical, fulfilling social obligations while helping your family. I told myself it was just business, just a contract that would expire eventually." Stella's heart hammered in her chest, but she stayed quiet, letting him continue. "But somewhere between your terrible attempts at rearranging my furniture and your insistence on buying flowers every week, between late-night conversations and learning how you take your coffee, I stopped thinking of this as a contract." He paused, his amber eyes intense and vulnerable. "I started falling for you, Stella. Actually falling for you." The world seemed to stop spinning. Stella stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know I have been difficult," Julian continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I hurt you with my distance at the beginning. But you broke through every wall I built, and now I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Not as a contract wife. As my actual wife, the person I want to build a real future with." "Julian," Stella whispered, tears gathering in her eyes again. "I am still scared," he admitted. "Scared of losing you, scared of not being enough, scared of all the ways this could go wrong. But I am more scared of not telling you how I feel, of wasting time being cautious when I could be loving you instead." Stella reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I have been falling for you too. From the moment you tried to make me those terrible pancakes, maybe even before that, when you held me during the rainstorm and let yourself be vulnerable, I felt something shift in my heart." Julian pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I do not want to wait anymore. I do not want to keep pretending I can maintain distance when all I want is to be close to you." "Then do not wait," Stella said softly. "Be close to me." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Stella did not want distance anymore either. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the obligatory kiss at their wedding. This kiss was full of feeling, of longing finally released, of two people choosing each other completely, when they finally broke apart, both breathless. Julian pressed his forehead against hers. "Take me home," Stella whispered. The question that changed everything the penthouse was quiet when they returned. The city lights casting soft shadows through the windows. Julian and Stella stood in the living room, the air between them charged with possibility and nervous anticipation. "You sure?" Julian asked quietly. "We do not have to rush anything." Stella took his hand and led him toward the stairs. "I have never been more sure of anything." They climbed to the 3rd floor, where Julian's bedroom occupied the entire level. Stella had never been inside before, respecting the boundary he had maintained. But tonight, all boundaries were dissolving. His room was surprisingly personal compared to the rest of the penthouse. Books lined one wall. A guitar sat in the corner, suggesting a hobby he had never mentioned. Photographs of family decorated the nightstand, and their face down in a drawer he had left slightly open. She glimpsed what must have been a picture of Victoria. Julian followed her gaze and gently closed the drawer. I am not trying to forget her. She will always be part of my past. But you are my present and my future. Stella turned to him, her eyes shining. I would never ask you to forget her. She helped make you who you are. He pulled her close, kissing her again with growing intensity. They moved toward the bed, a tangle of whispered words and gentle touches. Julian's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the zipper of her dress, and Stella realized he was just as nervous as she was. I have not been with anyone since Victoria, he admitted quietly. This means everything to me. You mean everything to me. Mean everything to me too, Stella whispered back. They took their time exploring each other, learning the geography of skin and heartbeat. Julian touched her like she was precious, irreplaceable, something to be cherished rather than claimed. And Stella responded with equal tenderness, showing him through every kiss and caress that he was safe with her, that she would not abandon him. That choosing to love again was not a betrayal, but an act of courage, as they lay together afterward. Tangled in sheets and moonlight, Julian propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. His amber eyes were soft, unguarded, full of the emotion he had kept locked away for so long. May I continue? He whispered, his voice breaking slightly on the words. May I continue loving you, building a life with you, being the husband you deserve instead of the stranger I was? Stella felt tears spill down her cheeks. The question was so much more than permission for physical intimacy. It was him asking if she would take his healing heart and trust him with hers. It was a man who had lost everything, asking if he was allowed to hope again. Yes, she breathed, pulling him close. Please continue. Please keep loving me. Please let me love you back. Julian buried his face in her neck, and she felt his tears against her skin. They held each other as emotions too big for words washed over them. Relief, joy, gratitude. The sweet ache of two broken people discovering they could be whole together. I love you, Julian said against her hair. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too. And we will be terrified together. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the city humming peacefully 60 floors below. For the first time in 3 years, Julian slept deeply, dreamlessly, his heart finally at peace. The morning that almost shattered everything's, Stella woke slowly, awareness returning in gentle waves. She reached across the bed, expecting to find Julian beside her. Her hand met only cold sheets. Her eyes flew open. The space where he had been was empty. The pillow still dented from his head, but lacking any warmth. Panic fluttered in her chest. She grabbed his shirt from the floor and pulled it on, then walked quickly out of the bedroom. She found him in the kitchen, fully dressed in a sharp suit, his hair perfectly styled, his expression carefully blank as he reviewed something on his tablet. He looked up when she entered, and for a horrible moment, his eyes held the same distant coldness from their wedding day. Stella felt her heart crack. Good morning, he said in his business voice. I have meetings all day. There is coffee if you want some. Stella stood frozen in the doorway. Wearing his shirt from last night, her hair messy from sleep and lovemaking, staring at a man who suddenly looked like a stranger again. Her voice came out small, uncertain. I need to leave in 10 minutes. We can talk later, something inside Stella snapped. All the pain from the lonely weeks, all the hope from the recent days, all the vulnerability from last night crashed together in a wave of hurt and anger. No, she said firmly. We talk now. Julian looked up, surprise flickering across his features. Last night, Stella continued, her voice shaking but strong. You asked if you could continue. You said you loved me. You held me like I mattered. And now you are treating me like I am invisible again. So which is it, Julian? Which version of you is real? The truth finally spoken. Julian set down his tablet slowly. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and she saw the internal war playing out behind his eyes. I woke up this morning, he said quietly, and for a few seconds, I forgot. I forgot about Victoria. I forgot about the pain. I just felt happy. And then I remembered everything, and the guilt nearly crushed me. Stella took a step closer. Guilt for what? For being happy without her? For moving on? For falling in love with someone new? His voice cracked. What kind of person does that make me? She has been gone 3 years, and I am already replacing her. Oh, Julian. Stella crossed the distance between them and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. You are not replacing anyone. You are healing. There is a difference. How do you know? How can you be sure I am not just running from grief into whatever this is between us? Because I know you, Stella said firmly. I have seen how you fight against feeling anything. If this were just running away, you would have kept your walls up. Instead, you had the courage to let them down. That is not avoidance. That is bravery. Julian's carefully maintained control shattered. His shoulders shook as years of suppressed emotion finally broke free. Stella wrapped her arms around him, holding him as he cried, letting him release the grief and guilt he had carried for so long. She would want you to be happy, Stella whispered. Anyone who loved you would want you to live, not just exist. Honoring her memory does not mean punishing yourself forever. I am so scared, Julian admitted between ragged breaths. I am scared that if I fully commit to loving you, something terrible will happen, that the universe will take you away too. Maybe something terrible will happen someday. Neither of us can control that, but we can control what we do with the time we have. Stella pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. We can waste it being afraid, or we can fill it with as much love as possible. Which would she want for you? Which do you want for yourself? Julian stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached up and loosened his tie, shrugged off his suit jacket, and let them fall to the floor. He pulled Stella close again, holding her like she was his anchor in a storm. I want to love you, he said clearly. I want to stop being afraid. I want to build the life we talked about. I want all of it. Then we will have it together. The beginning of forever, Julian canceled his meetings. He spent the entire day together, talking through fears and hopes and all the messy complexity of two people learning to trust love again. Julian told her stories about Victoria, finally able to remember her with fondness instead of just pain. Stella shared her own fears about not being enough, about the contract that had brought them together. Tear it up, Julian said suddenly. What? The contract? The agreement? All of it. I do not want any of this based on business terms. I want a real marriage. It's a kind where we choose each other every day. Stella smiled through fresh tears. I would like that very much. They found the contract in Julian's office and tore it into pieces together, letting the shreds fall like confetti. Then Julian pulled out his phone and called his lawyer, officially dissolving the business arrangement in all its terms. So what now? Stella asked as they stood surrounded by torn paper. Julian took her hands in his. Now we start over, properly this time. Julian Ashford, would you do me the honor of going on a real first date with me? Maybe followed by a second date, a third, and eventually a lifetime of dates? Stella laughed, the sound bright and free. I would love nothing more. That evening, Julian took her to a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood far from the glamorous places he usually frequented. They shared pasta and wine and talked until the restaurant staff gently informed them they were closing. They walked home hand in hand, stopping to kiss under streetlights like teenagers discovering romance for the first time. Back at the penthouse, Stella started gathering her things from the guest room. What are you doing? Julian asked from the doorway. Moving into your room, if that is okay. I do not want to sleep separately anymore. Julian crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her thoroughly. I was hoping you would say that. Over the following months, the penthouse transformed. Stella's touches appeared everywhere. Colorful throw pillows, family photographs, books scattered on tables. The comfortable chaos of a lived-in home. Julian started leaving work at reasonable hours, prioritizing time with his wife over endless meetings. They hosted dinner parties, traveled to places Julian had always been too busy to see, and talked seriously about starting a family. 1 year after their contract wedding, Julian planned a surprise. He took Stella back to the courthouse where they had signed papers, but this time their families filled the room. Friends crowded around them. Flowers decorated every surface. I want to marry you again, Julian said, taking her hands, not because of a contract, not because of business, but because I choose you. I choose us. I choose this life we are building together. Stella's father walked her down the makeshift aisle, tears streaming down his face. This time, when the officiant asked if she took Julian as her husband, Stella's yes rang out strong and joyful. When Julian said his vows, his voice was full of emotion instead of emptiness. And when the officiant said they could kiss, Julian pulled Stella close and kissed her like she was his whole world. Because she was. "I love you, Mrs. Ashford," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too, my real husband." They celebrated with everyone they loved, and later as they danced alone in their penthouse while the city sparkled below, Stella rested her head against Julian's chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For asking if you could continue. For having the courage to love again. For showing me that even broken things can be made beautiful." Julian tilted her face up to kiss her gently. "You took a man who had forgotten how to feel and reminded him what it means to be alive. We saved each other. We did. I will keep choosing you every single day for the rest of our lives." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, two people who had started as strangers bound by a contract neither wanted had found something neither expected. It's not just love, but the courage to believe in it again. It's not just a marriage, but a home. It's not just survival, but a life worth living. And they lived it together, beautifully, imperfectly, and completely in love.